we're talking about something that will interest a lot of you out there, whether you're based in Ghana or living abroad. If you're planning to buy a land or an apartment or a house, or you are trying to sort out a family property, this episode is for you. I brought in an expert lawyer in this field, and she's going to take us through the entire process, what it should look like, what very often goes wrong, and what you should really know before you put any money down. Elor, you're welcome. So, Elor, before we get into the specifics, please introduce yourself.
Okay, so my name is Elom Ahiati. I work with Lex Premier Associates. I do mostly corporate and commercial law, but we've also been the lawyers for Akakapa for the past 10 years,
Yeah,
I believe. And
yeah.
so I've worked on a number of real estate transactions with you, which is why I believe I'm here.
Exactly,
So,
exactly.
yes.
I wanted a voice of experience and somebody that knows the process really well from the legal perspective. So thank you for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
And so let's start somewhere important, right? As our legal advisor, you've seen several transactions, not only from us, but I'm sure you've assisted other clients. So, in your opinion, what really goes wrong? Where do we start from? What do you think is the first thing a buyer should really consider?
Okay, this is not me advertising, but I think the first thing would be to find a lawyer. The minute you decide you're going to buy property or you've identified property that you want to buy, consult a lawyer. I know most Ghanaians believe it's expensive and they don't want to spend the extra money, but it's making the investment ahead. It avoids so much headache afterwards because they would guide you through all the process, do the necessary due diligence and everything else that would prevent problems later on.
I fully agree, and in fact, you said it right. Normally, buyers tend to save on the legal aspect, the legal advice, and very often they end up spending much more when they find themselves in a difficult transaction with litigation or so on. All right, so let's dive in, and when people say I own a land or I own a property in Ghana, what does it really mean? Because we have different reality in different parts of the world.
So it means that you have an interest in the land, and that interest would be your right essentially to use the property for the duration of your lease. Or if it's a freehold, then it means you own it forever essentially.
Right.
So it's your interest or your right to use that land essentially.
So you don't really own it forever unless
It's a freehold.
It's a freehold, right? Okay. And so why do we see
But
so?
on freehold, I should add that the current Land Act actually prohibits the creation of freeholds in skin, stool, clan, and family lands. And
Okay.
so we can no longer create new freeholds, only leaseholds.
All right. So what happens to the existing freehold?
No, those are still valid. You just cannot create new freeholds. So you can only lease the land now, and that would be 99 years for Ghanaians and 50 years for foreigners. But you can no longer create a freehold.
So if a property owner has a freehold property, right, and decides to sell it to a buyer, in that process, is the buyer getting a freehold or will it be registered as a leasehold?
It would have to be a lease since the creation of a freehold is now prohibited.
Right. Okay. So this is an interesting aspect. So whoever says, "Oh, I'm buying a freehold," in reality is getting maximum 99.
So since the act only talks about stool, skin, clan, and family land, that means technically government lands can be a freehold can be created for those. But the reality is government would not be creating freeholds because the whole point is it's a policy decision. They're trying to create sustainable wealth so that the timelines on which one person has the land is limited for future generations to also access it. So it's not likely that they would also be creating freehold. So
Right.
yes, it would be leaseholds generally going forward. Yeah.
This is something that we will discuss further because I'm learning something here. So, and let's look. I have been in the industry for 20 years, but let's say in the past 10 years, do you think the system has improved, the system in terms of registration of lands and the number of disputes over lands have increased, reduced, the system improved or worsened?
So I think that the system, like in terms of registration, I think it has improved somewhat. You know, with digitalization, I think some aspects are a bit speedier now. Searches, you know, the instance of documents getting missing is also a little less. So in that sense, there's been some improvement. In terms of litigation and disputes, I don't know how far that has improved because given the number of land cases that are filed yearly, I cannot say if there's been much improvement in that. And also, I think because in areas like Accra, land is scarce and then we all want it. So there's always going to be greedy people who would keep, you know, selling to multiple people the same land, and therefore the disputes will keep coming, I think. Yeah.
But how is that possible in the sense of, you know, I purchase a property, I register it at Lands Commission, and then somebody else comes up. How, or, okay, if it was possible in the past, moving forward, will it still be possible with the new system? Or you think it will gradually fade away?
I can't say if it will fade away. These things happen for two main reasons, right? So fraud because somebody's selling the same land multiple times, and the reason that's possible is because sometimes people purchase land and because the system is a bit cumbersome, they do not register it, or they just don't know better. But sometimes it could also be as a result of mistakes. So sometimes I've had a personal experience actually where, you know, the land is sold to you. Maybe somebody bought 10 plots, another person bought 5 plots. The surveyor goes on the land, and in demarcating and allocating it to the various people, there's an overlap, you know, in terms of the plots. So in that sense, it's a mistake.
Right.
And so there'll be dispute. But most often than not, it's due to fraud, the land being sold multiple times to multiple people. And mostly because parties fail to register when they buy. So if someone goes to conduct a search, it doesn't show that there's another interest. And so they buy it thinking it belongs to the vendor that's selling to them, only to then subsequently end up in disputes with somebody else. So as long as all this human nature continues to exist and land is still scarce and we all still want property, I think the
It will
disputes
still
will remain
remain.
with us
For
some time. Yeah.
But you made a good point, and I want to really address this to the audience. More and more, I see buyers purchasing, do the whole process correct, right? But then, just because they think they finish paying, they don't do the registration, they don't complete the process, and they end up after 20 years. I have situations like that at the moment where the property is now registered in their name. There has been a bit of change, maybe with the developer, whatever, and it's a disaster. To resolve a problem like that, then what you've saved 20 years ago, now you're paying triple if you're lucky.
You and I have seen incidents where they don't even bother to have the deed signed. You know, so
we are trying to resolve a problem like that at the moment, and it's somebody disappears.
It keeps happening because, you know, once they've paid, they've been taken to the land, they believe it's theirs now, so have completed payments, and so that's it, you know, or they are given some document, whether or not it's been properly signed, whether they don't even bother to take any steps afterwards, and that's what leads to problems later because people see an avenue to then go ahead and sell again, and as the third party buyer, even if I do my due diligence and I do a search, it doesn't show you as having an interest in the land. And so I'll go ahead and also pay.
So when somebody buys an apartment within a development, right, what exactly is the interest of that buyer into the lease of the land?
Okay, so Like here at the lease, they own the unit that they've purchased. They own that for, the duration of the term of the lease. But in terms of the land on which the property is, so together with the other holders of units in the apartment structure, they would own whatever interest it is, whether it's a lease for 50 years or however many years. They would also own a part of that as tenants in common with the rest of the owners of other units within the complex.
Right.
Yes.
So, suppose the lease is 43 years,
Yeah.
and it's time to renew it at the
Yes.
time of renewal.
Yes.
How does it work? Every single individual renew the lease, or is it something that the entire developer?
Yeah, generally it would be the developer would takes on renewing the lease of the property. I think in my experience with the ones we've done, the developer takes on the renewal process, and then they allocate the fees to each property owner.
So
yes.
the cost is
So the
shared
cost is-
among
yes,
property
yes,
owners.
yes.
All right. Okay. So now that we understand the broader picture about property ownership, right, I want to get into something that I think confuses a lot, at least. I see a lot of buyers coming up confused about it. And when I started, it was confusing me as well, right?
Okay.
So we use the word title, we use the word lease. Sometimes you hear indenture, deed of sublease, deed of assignment. All right. Give us a bit of clarity about that. What is the
Okay.
difference between land title and the leasehold interest?
So the leasehold interest, I think, as I explained earlier, is your interest in the property. So it would tell you for however many years you are going to have the lease or the property for, right? Title is or land title really is it's the certificate that you get at the end of the registration process that shows your interest in the land. Basically, it's
Right.
that proof document or whatever. The other ones, the indenture or lease or assignment, deed of assignment, all of those are the conveyancing documents, the documents that you are given again to show whatever interest you've acquired in the land, which you then register. And then the final document you get, if it's in Accra or Ashanti region, I think those are the places where you get land title. That's land title certificate. That's the final certificate, essentially, just to show that you have this interest in this land, essentially, and you've registered it.
So that's what you need to prove it, right?
Yes, yes. Because it's also, once you've also registered it and you have that, it is notice to the whole world that, Yolanda has this term of years on this land.
This property, yeah.
Yes.
Okay, all right. So that's exactly what we were saying earlier, that
Yeah.
a lot of people don't get to that stage,
Yes.
don't apply and don't obtain the land title, and then gets into problems with the ownership. All right, very good. So we already spoke about how it works when the lease of a property within a complex expire, what the process is. Now the question is, what is the process when the lease on an individual property, like land or a house, is about to expire? What is the process to renew? How do I start it?
Well, so if it's about to expire, like, yes, you have two options to either give up the lease or to renew. And generally, I advise that you start the process, given the nature of registrations and things in Ghana, maybe 3 to 5 years before expiration.
Right.
And so you would do what we call a surrender and renewal, where you are surrendering the existing lease and asking for renewal of the lease for a certain number of terms. And then you would generally be giving a fee, which you would pay. So, which is another reason why I asked for 3 to 5 years, because you may need some time to raise the funds, to pay the renewal fee and all of that, and complete the process. So yes, that's generally what I advise that you do.
So 3 to 5 years allows enough time to raise the funds and to obtain the renewal.
Process, yes.
A lot of people at this point will want to ask you, how much will it cost me in 30 years to renew? And I always answer that we don't know. We don't know what the value of land.
Tell. Yes. Plus, the value of land, it changes, even areas.
Yeah.
The value of land in certain areas changes from time to time. So what East Legon lands used to cost 20, 30 years ago is very different from what it is
Oh,
now.
yes.
So if you were trying to renew a lease in such a place, it would be totally different from what you anticipated at the time you bought it 50 years ago, 20
Absolutely.
years
Yeah.
ago. So I cannot say until
I
that time comes and you do the application, then you find out,
there
what
and
you're
then,
required.
you
Yes,
know,
yes,
exactly. No, in fact,
yeah.
that's a question that very often, because the buyers will want to factor that cost that maybe is in 40 years time. And how can you predict that?
You cannot, yes.
In
You cannot
Ghana
predict. You
and
cannot
anywhere,
predict,
right?
yes.
And can a lease be revoked or challenged?
Yes. So generally, in the lease documents, there would be covenants. So if you fail to observe the covenants and conditions of the lease, that could be grounds for revoking the lease. Yes, it can be.
So a covenant could be that you use the property for residential use and you
So
end
you're
up
using it
having
for,
for
or
another
sometimes
purpose.
even some I've seen maybe developmental clauses. So you're supposed to start development or complete it within a certain number of years.
Nice, true. Yes.
Those also happen. So yes.
Okay, it was like some licenses that the
Yes.
government gives out, and then if you don't perform, they can revoke your
Yeah,
license. Yeah, of course.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
So now that we understand what the purchasing process is like and what the renewal process is, I want to discuss about the acquisition process, right? So, I always say that it's not that the type of property or the price of the property are the most important aspect. It's also knowing what you're buying into and what really long term your rights are, right? So can you walk us through the entire property purchase process in terms of from a legal perspective?
Okay. So from the minute you identify the land or property that you want to buy, like I keep saying, consult a lawyer.
Yes.
Right, to walk you through the entire process. Because from then, the first thing would be to do your due diligence, which would involve doing a search, first and foremost, a land commission. That would tell you whether the person purporting to sell the land to you is the proper person to even be selling it, and what transactions have happened on that land. So you do a search at land commission, and then if you have a lawyer, obviously, would also, because most lands in Ghana are prone to litigation, we would also do a search at the courts,
Right.
to see if there's any pending litigation in respect of that property. And then if it's a land that is owned by a company, you would also want to do a search at the Office of the Registrar of Companies, formerly Registrar General's Department, to identify who the officers are, to ensure that you're dealing with the proper persons in respect of the property.
The entity is legally registered.
Legally registered, and then the people you're dealing with are the proper officers to be dealing with in respect of that company's land. And then one of the key things as part of the due diligence also is to go on the land itself and talk to owners of adjoining lands, because most often than not, the neighbors always know, who has been coming to the land, because what may be seen on paper when you do a search may be different from what is happening on the ground.
Right.
So it's always important to also visit the land and speak to owners of adjoining lands in respect of the property, who they know as the owner, who has been coming there, if there's been any skirmishes there. You would find out all of that only from actually going on the land.
Absolutely.
So that's an essential part as well, yes.
So there are a lot of purchases that happen from overseas. So you have somebody here who says you can buy this land, or there is a project, you can buy a plot of land within the project. But your advice is not to just buy like that, to be present, to check, go to the land and see what the neighbors say.
Yes, even if not by yourself. Again, this is where you have an agent or you have a lawyer. Even your lawyer, we're willing sometimes to go to the land ourselves and do those inspections on your behalf.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is why it's essential. Yes.
Okay, I didn't know the lawyer can provide that service, but
I mean, as a part of doing a holistic due diligence for you before you buy the land, we would do that. Yes.
right, of course. Okay, so you mentioned, I mean, everybody speaks about search at lands commission, but you mentioned the search also at the court,
yes.
right? So not everybody does that, as we are saying, but what are you looking for when you do a search at the court? If there is litigation on the land?
If there's any litigation in respect of that land, yeah, that's what we.
So that doesn't reflect
the vendors.
a lands commission.
No, it will not reflect if there's litigation happening at lands commission. Lands commission would only show all the transactions that have happened on that land up to date. So it used to belong to party A. Party A sold it to party B, and party B sold it to party B, or there's been a mortgage, or there's been XYZ.
Okay.
Those are the things that will show at lands commission.
And if there is a mortgage, you see it at lands commission,
Yes,
because
because
the lender has registered. Okay.
But you would not see if there's any pending litigation. So, which is why we do that. We take that extra step just to see if there's any pending litigation in respect of the vendor or that particular land before we proceed. Yes.
So here I want to add another point.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I've known some people who go even further to even go to the House of Chiefs or something to find if there's any chieftaincy issues, because sometimes even if it's a stool land, the person who is the proper person to have signed the deed or conveyed that land to you. So some people take that extra step.
Right.
Yes.
Okay.
So,
and this is, of course, for stool
all
lands.
for the due diligence. Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
And one thing that I wanted to add here, and that's an advice for our audience. It happened more than once that I was in a transaction of a property where the previous owner had a mortgage, and never bothered, because he didn't have the advice of the support, let's say, of a lawyer, to get from the bank the discharge letter. And not having that discharge letter delayed the process so much that in the meantime, the interested buyer was so ready, it was a done transaction, the interested buyer found something else
and moved on.
And the deal was lost. So how much have you saved on the lawyer fees when you don't have all your documents in order and you find yourself, you're losing a sale? So.
And the funny thing is, getting the discharge is from the bank that I used to work in a bank.
Oh, right. I didn't know that. Life of yours, previous life.
Yeah. So that's actually not even that complicated that you need to have sought a lawyer for. So it's just our general attitude of not seeing things through to the end. So that once you finish paying off the mortgage, you should go to the bank and obtain that discharge, so
and then
and then have it
registered in your name.
Yes.
Yeah.
And have it registered, so it shows that you've paid off that loan. So if a search is done, it still doesn't show that the property is still mortgaged to XYZ bank. Yes.
And that puts the buyer becomes suspicious, or is still in the bank's name. So yeah, of course, yeah. So Elor, we discussed about the due diligence, search at lands commission, search at the court, search at registrar general if it's a company property. Now
visits to the site.
Visit to the site, which is also very important indeed. Now, what is the next step? So the buyer decides to purchase the property, or the lawyer says everything is in order, you can proceed. Right. So what comes next?
You would sign a sale and purchase agreement if because that would state how payment is going to be made and what else needs to be done before you conclude the terms of the lease, and all of that will be in the sale and purchase agreement. Once everything that is in the sale and purchase agreement has been, or if there are any pending issues even from the due diligence that need to be completed, you would state all of that in the sale and purchase agreement. So that when all of that is completed, then you've reached completion, you've made payment, then the conveyancing document is signed, you have your deed of assignment or lease or whatever. And then from then you proceed to registration.
Right. So the sales and purchase agreement says that at a certain point, when the buyer makes that amount of pays that amount of money, the seller issues the consent to assign.
Okay.
Right? Or applies, sorry,
for
for consent to assign.
Yes.
And normally, at what stage of the transaction is this done? Let's say when payment is made, 30%, 50%.
So those are generally would be something that would be negotiated between the parties. There's no like fixed.
So it's not a
It's
legal.
not, yes, it would be something that would be subject to negotiation between the vendor and then the buyer.
So a commercial,
Yes.
agreement. All right. Okay. So now we discussed already. We mentioned already that the lawyer is advisable. Lawyer is involved from the start, from the
Yes.
due diligence. And definitely, the due diligence is not something that the agent can do. The agent can assist in doing the due diligence through a lawyer, whether the lawyer is the one appointed by the buyer, or like in our case when we do the first due diligence in the beginning, right? So,
But I should say that it would be important to seek consent before you've completed payment, because if you've completed payment and then consent is not granted, generally it is. Usually it is. It's usually not withheld, but just in case it is, then what happens?
Yeah.
So it's like you said, it would be best that as part of the negotiations, you have that being something that would be applied for prior to you completing payment.
So, okay, we understand that a buyer shouldn't make full payment unless the consent to assign has been granted, right?
Generally, I mean, sometimes even we have done the situations where we finish payment and then obtain the consent, but it's advisable because I think we do that mostly because most often than not, it's not unreasonably withheld.
Yeah.
So it's granted unless there's been some non-observance of some covenants or something. It would generally be granted, right? So, but it's good to start the application for that, in the process of the you're making payments for the property.
Right.
Yes.
So in my experience so far, and normally, the payments are bound to certain milestones. So,
yes,
and
the
consent
consent is
application
one of them.
at a
Yes.
certain point, then the consent is released. Before it's released, you have to, you have the deed of assignment prepared. So, yeah, all right.
Yes.
Okay, so what do you think are the most common mistakes buyers make in the process?
The biggest one, not consulting a lawyer.
Well, definitely, yes.
Because then that solves a lot of the problems with them, taking you through the entire process. But another big one is that we just, they identify land and then they're pressured into just making payments. There's no acknowledgement of what the funds were for. Sometimes there's even no receipts, no documents, there's nothing. We just make payments and then that's it. And even without a lawyer, they do not do any due diligence. There's no search done.
How can people still get into
Which
that?
happens a lot.
Because we all know that there is a problem. There is a general problem that happens so often.
And
How
yet
can people be
it
pressured
keeps
for
happening
payments?
over and over and over. They identify land, they like it, they've gone to the land and seen it, and then that's it. They make payment without having done a search, without having signed any documents, and without having spoken to any lawyer. Nothing done. We make payment, and it's just the mistake that keeps happening over and over again, which is why there's so many disputes, really.
I don't even feel sorry when this happens, because if you haven't done all what you're supposed to do, I mean, at least the basics, from the basics to understand.
I think sometimes it's also ignorance, right? So
Yeah.
you do have to feel sorry because sometimes it's a lack of knowledge, I think, of what they are supposed to do, and we're generally trusting as well as a people. I think that's also part of.
Well, that's true. Yes,
Yes,
you don't start
with
the purchase with in the back of your mind
yes,
that you will be
exactly
going into this. But I think this is just an episode that is quite interesting. I received a call from somebody says, I am coming with my partner, and they were coming from Miami. And we've seen that property that you have, and we are coming to buy it, so I will be ready with the payment there and then. So already that made me feel uncomfortable because, nobody does that. And I said, no, let's see the property, let me provide you all the documents and so on. And then I really felt bad because I personally, and I'm so glad that I was there in person, met this gentleman with the partner, and the partner was an elderly lady, right? I don't want to say the nationality, but she was not Ghanaian, right? And I could see how much the gentleman was putting pressure on her to purchase the property. And I think in a way, he didn't like me in the end. He really didn't like me, but I didn't sell the property to her. She didn't buy.
Yeah.
So, but
You
and
were
this
trying to
situation,
protect, yes,
absolutely,
yes,
because I mean, of course, we are all there to do
make.
business.
I mean, you could have just sold it and made your commission.
No, and then
Yeah.
your name is once and for all destroyed. Call it so.
Yeah.
No. I felt sorry for her because I'm sure she didn't buy from me, but she probably has bought somewhere else. Yeah. So well. So we have spoken about the due diligence process. We have spoken about the process in, let's say, the commercial part of the process, right? But there is one thing that I forgot to ask you, which has to do with the site plan, right? Every time that we have a new property, the first thing that we ask is the site plan. And it seems that now we have regular site plan and barcoded site plan. So at which stage is land registered with the barcoded site plan?
So the barcoded site plan, it's for lack of, let's say it's a technological advancement on the certified site plans, right? So it comes with a QR code, and it essentially still does the same thing of helping. I think when they scan a House Lands Commission, identify the demarcations of the land,
Right.
right. It's only in, I think, Greater Accra, Eastern and Ashanti regions, though. So I think the other regions also still use the regular certified site plan. Yes.
But a site plan that doesn't have a barcode, is it still valid or not?
I think for purposes of the regions that now use the barcoded site plan, you would require the barcoded site plan.
The buyer has completed payment, right? So what is now the next step? What is the registration of the properties, Lands Commission and so on?
So the registration process, let me start by saying that Lands Commission has three divisions, the PVLMD, which is the Public Vested Lands Management Division, then the Survey and Mapping, and then the Land Title Registration Division. They all play a part in the registration process.
Different roles.
Yes, that's what I'm mentioning that, yes. So you would submit your documents, there'll be an assessment of stamp duty, which you would pay.
Right.
After that, the PVLMD itself would do an internal search and vetting of the documents and signatures and all of that. After that, they would contact you for inspection of the property.
Right.
When that is done, they would make an assessment of ground rent, which you would pay. Okay. And then when the ground rent is paid, the next step is also the application for consent, that consent has been obtained. When that's obtained, the next step is plotting, which ensures that the current transactions on the property are noted. Then after plotting is when it would now go to the land title registration. It will be lodgement at the land title registration division. Right. Right. Lodgement, there is where you would make payments for, you fill forms, make payments for lodgement. After lodgement, there would be preparation of a parcel plan by the Survey and Mapping Division. When the parcel plan is ready, it is then Land Title Registration Division. A request will be sent to PVLMD again for a search to ensure that there are no irregularities with the registration. Wow. And then when that is completed, then and the report comes back from PVLMD, then land title registration will now do a publication in newspapers, which will be noticed to people about the registration. If there's no objection received after the publications, I think it's usually for 14 days. If there's no objection received, then the registration process will be completed and you'll be issued your land title certificate if it's in Accra or Ashanti region. Or if the other regions, the registration process will be completed with all your stamps and necessary.
It's much more complicated than I
Yes,
had expected.
It's a very long process. Usually it takes about, to be safe, I always say it takes about 6 months.
Right,
Sometimes it can be more or less, depending on what issues come up in the process of the registration. But this is why people get fatigued and stop, and why it is, again, helpful if you have a lawyer guiding you through the process to do all of this.
How can an individual go through this part
Yes.
of the purchase, let's say, because it is part of the purchase, right?
Yes.
How can you go if you don't know where to go, who to speak to, what to pay, but so the stamp duty and the ground rent. Property owners pay ground rent every year, right? Am I
Yes,
right?
yes.
Okay, all right. So the seller has to make sure that
It's up to date.
as up to date with the payment. When application for consent is signed to Lands Commission, who is responsible to pay the stamp duty and the ground rent at that point? Is it still the seller or the buyer, or is part of the commercial transaction?
It would usually, you would have agreed if after the close of the transaction, whether it would be the buyer that takes on all the payments.
All right.
At Land Commission. Usually the buyer would make all the payments in terms of registration.
Right.
But sometimes if there's existing ground rent that hasn't been paid up
Goes
to
back.
that point, sometimes you would require that the seller pays that. Yes.
And who applies for the application for consent to sign?
The seller.
The seller.
Yes.
Okay, so
because up to that point, as the buyer, you have no interest in the land. There's no reason why you would be making an application for consent. So
right.
it's only the buyer that can make the
Yeah.
application.
All right.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, but definitely.
The seller, sorry, that can make.
Yes, the seller pays for the application for consent fee. But the process, it's really how you described it now, very complicated also because there are these three different departments that are involved. I thought plotting meant the surveyor comes, surveys the land, and then they plot it on the site plan. I don't know how to.
So I think it's how they then capture the current. How do I put it?
The coordinates, you mean?
No, the current transfer that is happening, like the current transaction.
Right.
Yes,
Okay.
the current
Okay.
transaction.
All
So
right.
that, because generally once from that point you'll be able to tell that it's been plotted in the name of.
So the
of this
history
person.
shows.
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, no, I don't think an individual can do this on their own. But you mentioned that it's then published on
In the newspapers.
in the newspapers, and then within 14 days, if there is no objection, is registered. But does it happen for all the transaction? Now there are so many apartments being built. Also for these, it goes in the newspaper, or it's mainly for lands?
It's for the land, but it's supposed to happen for the land. Once it's going through the registration process.
Right.
That's the process.
So, but the individual apartment that are being sold and registered in individual names, maybe because we haven't seen enough of that yet. Yeah. I can't tell. I mean, for the experience I had so far, is already chasing people to go and get your apartment registered in your name. Yeah. All right. I like to talk about the challenges that one faces when buying a property where the original owners have passed, so inherited property. What is that we should look out for in that circumstances?
So generally, if the person passed with a will, that means he would have executors.
Right.
Who would manage or administer the estate, his properties, right? So you would be dealing with, and then and then if the person passed without a will, the interested parties who go to court and get letters of administration will be the ones who would administer the estate. So in either case, it's the executors or the administrators. They would then vest the property in the beneficiaries. I mean, sometimes the administrators and executors are sometimes even the beneficiaries themselves. But in
Right.
either case, the property must be vested in the beneficiaries, who would then be the persons who can do a transfer to another party.
And so, so this is the vesting assent that you're
Yes,
referring to.
yes, yes, the
And
vesting
is it,
assent.
how can I say, issued by a lawyer, or is it issued by the court or by lands commission? Who is
No, so the vesting assent would be prepared by a lawyer, and once it's executed, it should be registered.
right?
Because just like all other land instruments, it would show that
At
the
the lands
property,
commission.
yes,
Okay.
because that's what would it would then reflect there that that property is now vested in XYZ instead of, the previous dead owner, deceased.
This is advising me because I asked for all these documents in a recent transaction, and the person passed away the father passed away in Canada, and they left it there. This happened more than 10 years ago, so they don't have
Letters
vesting,
of admission.
nothing.
And he died without a will.
He died without a will. He didn't die in Ghana, and the property is in Ghana. So now I said, when you are ready, let's come back to me when you are ready. That was my point. Yeah.
But then in that case, they would have to apply for letters of administration, which would allow them to administer his estate, and then with that, they can then vest the property in the proper
But it's a
beneficiary.
long process. I assume that doesn't take like 2-3 months or more.
Oh, the earliest don't usually take very long.
Okay.
Maybe 2-3 months it should be done from filing to. They don't take. It's not as long as land matters.
All right.
Yes.
Okay. I thought
They
it
don't
was
take
also.
no. They don't take too long, so that should be done. And then they vest it, and it should be possible to do that.
Maybe I should follow up with them.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
If they are so minded, yes.
Right. Okay, this is interesting. This is interesting because there was also a conversation. I was at a dinner, and it was only ladies' dinners about women empowerment and so on, and the fact that women can also own property in Ghana. And I said, I thought that was just obvious, right? We have the same rights.
Yes,
Am I right?
Yes.
Okay, all right. But now what happens if the husband has purchased the property and we are married, right?
Yeah.
How is the husband the only owner?
Okay, so Article 22 of our Constitution, right? It guarantees equal or equitable access to marital assets.
Right.
I think this were all done to protect women because traditionally we were homemakers and we contribute domestically, and then at the end of the day they lose out on assets when in a divorce or death or all of that. So it guarantees that, and then I think even in the Land Act 2020, there's a provision that provides protection in the sense that even when the property is registered in only one spouse's name, it's married, it was acquired during the marriage, it will be deemed to be for both parties.
Okay, so during the marriage,
yes,
though.
during
Okay.
the marriage.
All right.
But the other thing is that there's been some cases, I think Aisha too, for instance, where the courts have departed slightly from that. So it's become more something that happens on a case by case basis. So I advise that as a spouse, male or female, although it's predominantly women, you take an interest in assets that are being acquired in the course of your marriage. So you ensure that it's being acquired in your joint names if it's a house, so that when the time
registered,
comes, registered in both of your names, so that when the time comes. My husband and I have this running joke where we actually register them in my name because he says that he can fight anybody else when the time comes. He doesn't want me to put me in a situation where I have to fight for
Maybe
property.
he doesn't want to fight you.
Yeah, so we'll put assets in my name instead. But yes, ensure that any asset that is being acquired, you are, even if you are not working at 9 to 5, you're working in the home. It's a lot of work working in the home. The mental labor is a lot. So you should ensure that you are also being protected, that your interests are being, registered in properties that are being acquired in your marriage, just to avoid now having to rely on the courts to determine for you whether or not, what you get.
And then you don't know if you
Yes,
really,
yeah,
even if the law is there, you have no
yes,
certainty.
yes.
Okay.
But yes, our constitution made the effort to protect,
Both
equitable,
parties.
yes,
Yeah.
interest in spousal properties. Yes.
I think in this sense, Ghana is more advanced than other countries. In Italy, and I'm Ghanaian, but I'm originally Italian. You have to choose when you get married. You have to choose whether you want to be married in separation of assets or
in
comunione dei beni. I don't know how to translate that in English, but we share everything 50-50.
yeah.
Or what is
we-
mine is mine,
mine.
and what is yours is yours. You have to declare it when you get married. And sometimes, you think you make the right choice, but then
yeah. And that makes sense perfectly at the beginning, but what tends to happen when you start having kids is that
yeah.
disproportionately the woman is now staying home and taking care of the kids and ends up having to give up her career. So she's no longer earning an income in the traditional sense, but she's still contributing to work, and so should have that's
The
her
same right,
contribution,
yes, exactly.
and so should have some rights to whatever assets are acquired in the marriage, because it's her work in the home that enables you to make the money that acquires those assets, right? But
Culturally,
Yeah.
and this is not for Ghana only, but I
Yeah.
think everywhere, all the work that a woman does in a home, raising children, taking care of everything, it's considered no work, right? But if you have to employ somebody to do that job for you,
that means employing a nanny, a housekeeper, a driver,
and
personal assistants, because you're planning schedules for kids, and it's a lot of work.
I would say you think the house run by itself, but
no.
somebody behind that makes all of that. Well, and you have young children, and when you work full time, it's a whole lot of work. Yeah. Are you being paid?
Well, to be fair, he makes it easier for me to.
Okay, because he's a good husband, right? Yes. So, all right. So we've been talking about acquiring lands and what the process is, but and the process in the sense how buyers should protect themselves and what the process is, right? And we understand that number one, have a lawyer advise you and making sure that all the due diligence process and registration process are complete. But now let's also speak about the other side, about property owners, and something that has made quite a bit of noise lately on social media and on the news, which is the role of the rent control department and what the regulation says about rent and charging rent. Yes, exactly.
Okay, so I'm sure we're talking about rent advance payment.
Rent advance payment.
Yes.
So I will start from what is really the rent control department role today?
So their main role is to enforce the rent laws and regulations, and also they resolve disputes between landlords and tenants.
Right.
Those are the main things that the rent control does. Yes.
Right. So the issue was about what we're talking the most, and I understand, is to protect the tenants. Is how many month rent you can charge and how rent increase is applied, and so on.
So by the Rent Act, by Act 220, you're not supposed to charge rent in advance of 6 months, right? For the long term leases, but what tends to happen in Ghana, as we all know, is that landlords demand 1 year, 2 years, etc. And by under the act, that's an offense. But I think it's also a market structure thing, right? So the resources, being accommodation, is scarce, and the demand is high. So the landlords are seeing an avenue by which they can demand whatever and people pay it. And then sometimes, like some of your clients, companies, they just really would rather not have to be paying rent in short periods. They'd rather pay it in advance. So if it is a matter where I believe the the tenant is choosing what works better for them, and they are choosing to waive the protection offered under the act for them, I'm not sure why that should be
It should be a
an issue.
problem. Yeah, yeah.
Yes, but I think it should not be a matter where somebody is being forced to have to make that payment in advance, because then it's an offense, and of course then you can go to rent control and have them intervene.
Yeah, but you see, now, if on one side, when we talk about high-end properties, there is quite a good supply, and or definitely the supply exceeds the demand. On the other hand, when we look at low-cost accommodation, that's rather the demand is way higher than the supply. So a property owner has the advantage of saying, if you want it from me, I charge you 2 years. It's a very thin line between, in my opinion. So I don't know how they can enforce it, right?
Well, the thing also is, rent control cannot enforce these things unless they are aware, right? And so
Right. Yeah, well,
if we as the tenants or the people renting just keep going ahead to agree to it because we're, well, I can't blame them, also desperate for a property and you found one, then there's very little that rent control can do to help you.
yeah, definitely.
So yes, the thing is an offense, but if they are not aware of it, they can't enforce what needs to be done.
This is one of these complicated
Yeah,
situations that I don't think we will be able to. I mean, until all the tenancy agreements are registered and so on. And again, the informal part of the market is that side of the market, right? So that becomes even more difficult to control, I think. Yeah. Okay. So now real estate, it's really evolving in Ghana to an extent that in a few years, I think lawyers will have much more work to do in terms of registering so many properties that are landing on the market, and the fact that land, because it's becoming so scarce in Accra, we will have to start really expanding. So how do you see that one from where you sit in terms of a lawyer, working in various aspects of the law, but that's also land disputes, land registration, and so on is also part of what you guys do.
How do I see it evolving?
Yes.
Well, in terms of the market and us having more work as lawyers, I'm not sure. I think our attitudes are still very generally the same as the people.
Right.
So yes, maybe corporations and the more professionally run real estate agencies are tending towards using lawyers more and more. But as individuals, we are still very much in that state where people are still buying land even today without having done any searches, without consulting any lawyer. And by virtue of all of that, the disputes would continue happening.
Definitely.
And yes, so some parts are improving. For instance, with the registration processes, it's getting a little speedier with digitalization, but other parts, which is mostly an attitude thing and how we view things and how we handle things, those will still remain the same, unless there's a mindset shift.
Yeah, and I think it has a lot to do with the fact that there are so the Ghanaians, I believe, but it's not only the Ghanaians. It's what you want is to first own the car, and secondly have your own property, right? And of course, there are different brackets of the market. Not everybody can afford the 1 million. So, and therefore there are more opportunities for those out there who try to take advantage of those who don't know how the process is, and continue to create these unfortunate situations that don't help the business in the end, right? So, but well,
hopefully it gets better.
We hope that it gets better. Yes.
Maybe with podcasts like this, as people get more more knowledgeable about the risks they are taking without registration or without doing a due diligence or without doing searches. hopefully we become more aware, and then we're taking all the right steps to
And that's true. That's why we decided to have this educational type of podcast to help who wants to enter real estate at any level to be more informed, whether it has to do with the legal aspect, whether it has to do with the construction aspect, or so. There is so much around real estate that it's. You need to know. You really need to know a lot of things. So yes, we hope that the podcast is going to be useful, and definitely this episode will be very useful. And I know that a lot of people out there will find information that they didn't know in this podcast. And please, yes, use a lawyer, use professionals. Don't try to cut corners, because what you try to save in the beginning, in a purchase or an investment, you are going to pay much more if you encounter a problem, a litigation, or whatever imperfection of a document. It will cost much more in the end. So yes, and Ellen, you've been very helpful. It's been very interesting. I also learned. I thought I knew a lot, but I need more of these episodes to learn more. And thank you very much, Ellen. I really appreciate this time, and we hope to have you on again for a deep dive into this issue. Thank you so much, Ellen.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Ellen.